Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our 2026 Request for Applications webinar. My name is Chanel Ford. I'm the Director of Programs for the Native American Agriculture Fund. I grew up on the Spokane Indian Reservation. I'm an enrolled member of the Spokane Tribe, and I am very grateful to be here today with you all. So today we are going to be discussing specifically our RFA overview. And with that, we'll discuss the changes, we'll talk about eligibility, we'll talk about funding categories, deadlines, found it walkthrough, and a Q&A to wrap us up. I also want to note that this webinar is scheduled from 2 to 4 p.m. Central Time, and it will also be recorded and available on our website. To discuss with you our Q&A process, I'm going to pass it on over to Whitney.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Whitney Sawney. I am a citizen of Cherokee Nation and the Director of Communications and Policy at NAAF. We are grateful for your time today, and so thank you for joining us for a review of our grant application. But before we start our presentation, just a few housekeeping items. First, we will have a dedicated question and answer session at the end of this presentation. And we do have members of our team monitoring the questions as they come in through the Zoom question and answer box and chat. To ensure we're able to communicate all information and make this accessible to those joining in by phone, we'll make sure to read all of the presentation slides. And as another reminder, the webinar will be recorded and posted to the NAAF website, along with an option to download the presentation slides following the conclusion of this webinar. All right, and now we are going to hear a welcome message from our CEO, Tony St. McLaughlin.
Good afternoon, Limpt. Thank you for being here. First of all, I want to let each and every one of you know that we appreciate the work that you do day in and day out within your communities to support tribal agriculture. Your dedication and leadership truly make a difference, and we're grateful for your partnership. For those newer to NAAF, the Native American Agriculture Fund is a private charitable trust. We are the largest philanthropic organization dedicated solely to supporting Native agriculture. Since our founding, we've deployed nearly $90 million across 590 different programs. In past years, NAAF has identified specific priority funding areas that we call special emphasis. This year, we chose not to include this special emphasis in the spring funding cycle. Instead, we are being flexible and adaptive to the needs of our community, and we're offering a second funding cycle that will take place later in the year. We know that you're facing challenges, and again, we want to help you in your resilience by being adaptive to those needs. We are committed to being more than just a funder. We want to be here as a long-term partner. We want to help these organizations and entities and tribal communities through sharing knowledge and best practices, as well as learning from you. This year, we look forward to all of the applications that we're going to receive. We hope that you stay tuned for the remainder of our webinars and pay particular attention to our Q&A sessions and office hours that are new this year. So again, Limp, thank you for being part of NAAF, or if you're new here, welcome. We look forward to meeting you, and good luck in this year's funding cycle. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tony. So Chanel was going to review our application requirements in a moment, but to start us off, I want to provide more context about NAAF and how we came to be and why our grant funding is focused on increasing access to capital for Native farmers and ranchers. At its core, NAAF's foundation is about healthy lands, healthy people, and healthy economies. NAAF is unique in that we are a private charitable trust and we are not a part of the federal government. So our funding is private, and that gives us the flexibility to be solutions-oriented and hands-on with our grantees and the projects that we fund. But we are also legally bound by our trust agreement, which is a governing document that outlines who is eligible and how our grant funding must be used. And the reason that our trust exists, the reason that NAAF exists at all, goes back to a long history of barriers to credit and lending. So I'm going to go over that in more detail. NAAF was created through the Cypre provision of the Keepsiegel class action lawsuit settlement, which was called Keepsiegel v. Vilsack. That was a case rooted in alleged discrimination that Native farmers and ranchers experienced when accessing USDA lending and services. The core of Keepsiegel was about production agriculture, Native farmers and ranchers seeking loans and loan servicing through USDA and encountering things such as denials, delays, poor processing, and in many cases, blatant discrimination. The roots of that case actually stretch back decades. In fact, some of the claims tied to this go back to the late 1970s and early 1980s. There were Native producers who raised concerns and filed complaints, only for some of those claims to sit idle and unaddressed for a number of years. The Keepsiegel case was filed in the late 1990s and moved through decades of litigation. Around the same time of Keepsiegel, there were other farmer discrimination cases, which included Pickford 1 and 2 for Black farmers, Love and Garcia for women and Hispanic farmers. And also at the same time, Native producers across the country experienced similar harms. And because of this, a class action was filed under the Equal Credit Opportunity Act for unfair access to credit and poor loan servicing. And then by 2010 and 2011, the case reached a settlement. And it's important to clarify a common point of confusion here is that Keepsiegel was a class action, but it was not resolved as a class judgment in the way that people often assume. It was resolved through settlement and an individual claims process, where individual claimants selected different tracks with different levels of burden of proof required. In total, 4,300 claims were submitted and 3,600 were approved. The settlement from Keepsiegel included debt relief, tax support, and additional programmatic improvements intended to reduce the likelihood of those original harms from continuing. So unclaimed funds from the settlement after the claims process and the claimants were awarded, the settlement included a cypre provision, which is a legal doctrine allowing unclaimed funds from a class action settlement to be distributed to a nonprofit organization, in this case, a nonprofit serving Native American farmers and ranchers, as long as their work aligns with reducing or eliminating the original discrimination harms that were claimed during Keepsiegel. So what this means is that cypre funds were distributed to address the circumstances that originally created the problem. So cypre is often used in class action lawsuits and settlement agreements, but the key takeaway is that you cannot deviate too far from the core issues that are central to the original harms. And that is why our trust agreement, which is our governing document, outlines that we must fund within specific boundaries and to eligible entities. And as a part of the Keepsiegel outcome, the court ultimately directed the remaining funds be deployed for the long-term benefit of Native agriculture through a structure, and that structure became NAAF, and NAAF was formally established in 2018. So why is access to capital at the center of all of our funding? Everything we do flows from the original harms that Native producers experienced. The people who filed Keepsiegel claims were harmed because they could not access credit fairly, and because they experienced things such as denials and delays and discrimination, poor servicing when trying to participate in USDA lending and assistance programs. So our funding must connect back to the broader umbrella of access to capital. And when we say access to capital, we're not only talking about just loans. We're talking about the full ecosystem that makes credit usable and fair. So things like credit education, credit readiness or coaching, lending infrastructure, like building institutions that can lend in credit deserts, ag lending capacity, because we know that agricultural loans are unique and they require a specialized knowledge. Another example would be how lending works in a tribal and trust land context. So really, NAAF supports a broad set of strategies under this umbrella as long as it supports agricultural business assistance, technical support, education, and advocacy services, because access to capital, as we all know, is a connected system. And our trust agreement defines who is eligible to receive NAAF funding. And there are 4 eligible entity types, and that includes tribal governments, 501c3 nonprofit organizations, educational institutions, and community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. So when we ask, and you ask, why is access to capital at the center of NAAF's funding? Why are we seeing that so consistently throughout the application process? It is because NAAF exists due to the case about credit access. And on the next slide, I want to give another quick overview of what agriculture looks like in Indian country, and also an overview of our previous funding cycles. So we know that tribal communities often exist in deeply rural places and sometimes in checkerboarded regions where native and non-native producers overlap. But you'll see in this image on the screen that native producers really spread across the United States, with the largest number of producers being in Oklahoma, Arizona, and New Mexico. A lot of those areas overlap where a number of the keep single claimants or keep single claims were filed. Since 2018, NAAF has funded nearly $86 million in grants to all of our eligible entities. We have funded across 590 programs that have helped expand economic opportunities to access to capital, building capacity, and strengthening agriculture. That has impacted more than 105,000 individuals, including more than 50,000 students and youth, as well as more than 53,000 ranchers, farmers, harvesters, and fishers with NAAF support. So now I'm going to turn it over to Chanel, our Director of Programs, to review our request for application process.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Whitney. I appreciate that. So now we're going to dive into information regarding this year's RFA overview process. You'll be able to see, I think we'll provide a link in the chat to our website that houses our RFA overview. So this is going to be basically the document you're going to utilize while applying for this year's application. So next slide. Thank you so much. So eligible entities, 501c3 organizations, educational organizations, community development financial institutions, also known as CDFIs, and tribes and their instrumentalities are all eligible to apply for NAAF's funding. Eligibility requirements must be met at time of application. There's more in-depth information about eligibility on page 5 of that RFA overview document I was referring to. I do want to go back just to share a few notes in regard to these 4 entities, just so that you can get kind of an understanding of what it is that we're referring to when we say eligibility. So per our trust agreement, as Whitney mentioned, nonprofit organizations with our IRS Section 501c3 must have tax-exempt status. If such status has not been achieved, such organizations may apply for funding through a fiscal sponsor that has received such 501c3 tax-exempt status. I'll be chatting a little bit more about fiscal sponsor here in a bit. Our educational organizations that apply are described in Section 170B1A2 of the Internal Revenue Code, tribally controlled or bureau-operated schools, as well as schools operated by an Indian tribe or tribal organization, aligned with the language in the Section 170 of the Internal Revenue Code, qualifying them as eligible education institutions for the Native American Agriculture Fund's NAAF grant. Also, tribally controlled or bureau-operated schools granted under the Tribally Controlled Schools Act or deemed eligible by Section 5205 fall within this category as well. Similarly, schools operated by Indian tribes or tribal organizations that enroll K-12 students, including preschool, also meet this eligible criteria. Community development financial institutions, our CDFIs, must also hold a tax-exempt status, so a 501c3 status. An instrumentality of a state or federally recognized tribe, including a nonprofit organization chartered under the tribal law of a state or federally recognized tribe that furnishes assistance designed to further Native American farming or ranching activities, provided, however, that one use of any grant funds by such grant recipient shall be restricted exclusively to charitable and educational purposes. 2, the grant recipient shall annually provide NAAF with audited financial statements and reports as required by NAAF. I also want to flag here that if you are a tribe, we do require you submit a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. And this just goes along in terms of the amount of funding awarded and the length of the grant. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Lenora to share an important notice.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Lenora Moore. I'm a compliance officer here at NAAF, and I'm a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. So we just wanted to go ahead and let you know an important notice. For any of our returning grantees, if you have had a grant with us in the past or you have a current active grant, we just wanted to let you know that it is very important that you be up to date or in compliance with all of your reporting requirements for that grant. And so if you have fallen behind on reporting for your grant, then you will not be eligible to apply for 2026 funding. This means that if you have a report, like a quarterly, mid-year, annual, or final report that is past due by the time the application closes, then you will not be considered for 2026 funding. We want to work with you closely to try to make sure that everyone's up to date by the time that date comes. So please, if you need help, reach out to your POC and we'll do our best to get you squared away.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Lenora. So as I shared earlier, I noted fiscal sponsorship. So NAAF encourages startup nonprofit organizations that have applied for their 501c3 status from the IRS. You have not received a favorable determination letter. You can apply through a fiscal sponsor. They can provide important technical support for proposed project activities. If fiscal sponsors are used, this fiscal sponsor must be an eligible 501c3 organization and should follow the guidance in NAAF's fiscal sponsor information. That fiscal sponsor information is located in our FAQ document on our website. We just want to flag this as well. The relationship between you, the grantee, and your fiscal sponsor, if you choose to go this route, is not managed by us. So this is a sole responsibility of you, the grantee, and that fiscal sponsor to maintain that relationship. Okay, so here we have our NAAF 2026 RFA overview slide. I've covered a little bit of this, and Lenora's covered a little bit as well. I will dive deeper into addressing access to capital, but what I'd like to touch on is allowable and unallowable use of funds. So, and this information can be found on page 3 of our RFA overview. To go over briefly, just a few examples of allowable. We're required to only provide grants to entities specifically outlined in our trust agreement. So those 4 entities that are mentioned: educational institutions, 501c3s, tribes and instrumentalities, or CDFIs. The trust agreement prohibits NAAF from providing grant or loan funding directly to individual Native farmers and ranchers. So unfortunately, we will not accept applications directly from individuals. The key focus areas for which funding is allowed under the trust agreement are broadly described as business assistance, ag education, technical support, and advocacy services. Eligible entities are described in our overview in more depth on page 5. Funding may be used for projects that are either 12 or 24 months in duration. Funds can be used for project support, general organizational support, scholarships and regrants, lending programs, or capital expenditures. All applications must contain clear descriptions of the project activities and the population targeted for such support, and budget narratives must clearly show how funds are going to be used. Use of all NAAF-provided templates within the application are required. So I'm going to share here next the type of applicants or uses of funds that are not eligible under our 2026 request for applications. So entities that do not provide business assistance, ag education, technical support, or advocacy services to Native farmers and ranchers, work based outside the United States or its territories, projects that do not provide assistance and or resources designed to impact and further assist in the success of Native farmers and ranchers, projects that seek funding predominantly to provide outreach on USDA programs and services, resources for those types of activities that are already provided by the USDA, projects that assist individual Native farmers, ranchers, and producers, use of funds that are not restricted exclusively to charitable and educational purposes described in IRS Section 170C2B. You are not allowed to use funds for litigation. You are not allowed to use funds for lobbying, and any other information in regard specifically to unallowable and allowable costs, as I said before, can be found in our RFA overview. All right, now getting into our targeted projects. So Joe and I will go over the 4 entities and how you can apply if this is your entity. So first off, we have 501c3 organizations, general focus application. Your available pool is $1 million. The minimum amount you can apply for is $100,000, and the maximum amount you can apply for is $250,000. So some projects can focus on ag education, technical support, business assistance, and advocacy services. So in the middle here, you're actually going to see a few of the grantees that we had funded from 2025. I wanted to just give you kind of an insight on a few here and what they spent their funding on. So we have American Farm Bureau. They're out of Washington, D.C. They had a project called the Purple Plow Challenge that focuses on Native American student interests, such as resilience and food security, providing authentic hands-on learning opportunities that connect science, technology, and ag. And through this project, it's really neat. These students are going to identify a real ag issue, design and test a solution, and present their findings to help build critical skills in leadership, problem solving, and financial literacy. We also have Indian Pueblo Cultural Center out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And this project is really supporting entrepreneurs through business seminars, farm and garden trainings, and they're also providing stipends for up to 90 Native entrepreneurs. This project addresses gaps in mentorship, funding, and market access by providing training in financial planning, sales strategies, and technical support. Okay.
Thank you, Chanel. Good afternoon. This is Dr. Joe Graham. I'm from the Laguna Pueblo in New Mexico, and I'm the point of contact for educational organizations. This year, the available pool is $1 million, with a minimum application level of $100,000 and a maximum application level of $200,000. Educational organizations can apply in any of the areas: business assistance, education, tech support, or advocacy services. We have, so in the middle there, you see some programs that were funded this last year. Arizona Board of Regents, that's the University of Arizona in Tucson. But what they're doing is they're working with their FERTEP agents to do outreach on all the different reservations that they work with. And in those universities, in those reservation sites, they're creating what they call task kits. They're like emergency kits for ranchers to be able to do first line work in kind of like veterinary and animal health. You also see on there the United Tribes Technical College. That's in Bismarck, North Dakota. And what they're doing is they're doing an outward facing fruit and vegetable stand, which is going to be become part of their curriculum in ag business, so that students will be able to get some hands-on experience in marketing, buying, purchasing, all the different aspects, including selling, the different parts of ag business curriculum. Some educational organization reminders. We look at a broad definition for educational organization, and it covers all those under Section 170 BIA, II of the IRS code, including K-12 schools, post-secondary institutions such as TCUs, tribal colleges and universities, NAAF, Native American serving non-tribal institutions, and other institutions that must have a history and experience in serving Native farmers and ranchers. Also included is BIE schools, Bureau of Indian Education schools. Further, institutions the bigger institutions that have FERTEP agents, the RFA should be developed to include the FERTEP agents' participation. Next. Okay. Um, NAAF encourages BIE schools to apply for funding. And NAAF is very interested in investing in programs that provide information and guidance to Native youth interested in choosing food and agriculture as their future career choice, as well as specifically reaching out to Native students who attend these schools. Okay. I'm also the point of contact for the tribal grants. And so here's some important reminders for tribes. Each tribe that's granted is going to have to supply a limited waiver of sovereign immunity. This is part of the grant agreement, so it's required and there's no exceptions. Also, if a tribe is working in a project regarding industrial hemp or including it, feasibility or market studies only. No funding of production. NAF will not fund production of hemp. Next. Okay, so for the tribes, the available pool is $1 million. The minimum is $100,000 and the maximum is $250,000. We mentioned before, the general focus is on business assistance, ag education, technical support, and or advocacy services. And some of the 2025 grantees include the Fort Berthold Land and Livestock Association. At Fort Berthold, they are putting miles and miles of fence up to protect not only to protect range, but to keep animals where they need to be so they're not jumping onto highways. And it's a lot of rural country up there, and if people are driving around in the middle of the night and there's a cow on the road, that could be very, very dangerous. The Crow Creek Sioux Tribe, Hunkpati processors, what they're doing is they're trying to purchase, or they've actually purchased already, large grain silos so that they can get ahead of storage situations in their tribe. So these are just some examples of the kind of projects that are there. And of course, if you go to our website and you go to the tab on grantees, you can find many, many more examples. Next. Okay, so we talked about tribes and their instrumentalities is the way we said it. So instrumentalities of tribes, state or federally recognized tribes, can mean any number of things. Tribal governments have the latitude to determine which entities are instrumentalities of their governments. NAAF needs only proper documentation of that status. If an organization wishes to be considered as an instrumentality of a tribal government, the organization must secure and submit an authorizing document from their tribal government to that specific effect. A statement from an organization other than a tribal government will not suffice for this purpose. So for my tribe in New Mexico, in the Laguna Pueblo, the Pueblo of Laguna, could apply for a grant. The Department of Natural Resources is under the tribe, so they could apply for a grant. We have different villages in our pueblo, and each has a set of leaders that we call the mayordomos or the mairumas. And so the mairumas could, as a village, apply because they are a part and instrumentality of the overall tribe. So, and I spoke with some folks up in Alaska, and they had a consortia that is made up of each of several different Alaska villages. And as a group, that consortia could apply as a tribe. So those are just some examples. And when it really comes down to it, it'll be decided on a case-to-case basis.
Okay, I'm going to speak to our sovereign immunity waiver. So the Native American Agriculture Fund is a private charitable trust created by the 2010 settlement of Keep Seagull, as we reviewed earlier in this presentation. The final settlement agreement provided for the distribution of grants to federal and state recognized tribal governments and their instrumentalities. So NAAF recognizes that tribes are immune from suit or action as a sovereign government, and that sovereign immunity is vital to the functioning of tribes in all of its subdivisions and subordinate bodies. The waiver of a tribe's immunity from suit or action is occasionally required when entering into certain transactions. So the court-approved trust agreement that created NAAF contains a provision that requires tribal governments to provide a limited waiver of sovereign immunity in order to receive NAAF grant funding. The reason for this requirement stems from NAAF serving as a fiduciary of the trust funds with a duty to protect its funds from fraud or gross mismanagement. For grant purposes, accessible waivers of tribal sovereign immunity are limited to the amount of the NAAF grant and for the duration of the grant relationship. If a tribe or tribal entity wants to accept NAAF grant funding, it must work with the tribe's legal counsel to adopt a waiver of sovereign immunity related to the NAAF funding and a resolution for the tribal governing body. So tribal governments and instrumentalities must provide waivers and resolutions within the 3 months of receiving of the NAAF grant award. Failure to submit an executed waiver and accompanying resolution in a timely manner will result in forfeiture of any award amounts. Both documents, which include the waiver and the tribal resolution, can be pre-approved by NAAF to expedite the effort, and getting your documents pre-approved will also save you time during the application and post-award period.
Awesome. Thank you, Whitney. And I apologize, y'all. I did not even share with you our points of contact. So Joe had mentioned that he is the point of contact for our tribes entities and as well as our EDUs. I am the point of contact for our CDFI projects and am serving as the point of contact for our 501c3s and up until Riley Disatel's return. So what that means is if you are funded with a NAAF grant, then you have a dedicated team that will work with you per your entity that you apply with. We'll work with you throughout your 12 or 24 months with us here at NAAF. So just wanted to flag that. Thank you for reminding me about that, Joe. And I also wanted to share too, you gave a great example of an instrumentality and how to apply via an instrumentality or a tribe. And I wanted to note that tribes and 501c3s can also apply simultaneously. So for example, on my reservation, there's Spokane Tribal Network. They are a nonprofit organization on the Spokane Indian Reservation. They are separate from the tribe, but serve the tribal community. The Spokane Tribe applied for funding, and so did the Spokane Tribal Network. So a tribe applied and a nonprofit from that same tribe applied, and that they were allowed to do that. So we have had questions in the past of, oh my gosh, if there's multiple programs applying for funding, are we going to be ineligible if you see these projects come through and it's from the same tribal community? As long as the projects are not identical and they are separate projects, then you can apply if you're from the same tribal community. That does not mean that you are, your application is ineligible. So I wanted to note that. So discussing here our CDFIs, you'll notice that the available pool of funding here is $5.5 million. And as Whitney shared and I shared earlier, since we are not allowed per our trust agreement to directly distribute funding out to a sole farmer rancher producer, a great way to do that is either one through our 501c3s via stipends or granting programs, or through our CDFIs in their specific lending programming. So projects usually focus on loan capital, regranting capital, and technical assistance, business assistance. The available pool here is $5.5 million. And we do not have a minimum or a maximum here. We ask that you do not request the full amount of the available pool. So do not request the full $5.5 million. In the middle here, we have a few of our prior grantees, Occupan out of South Dakota. We have 4 bands, Pacific Northwest Tribal Lending, and People's Partner for Community Development. Pacific Northwest Tribal Lending is actually located in the Pacific Northwest in Western Washington, and they're formerly known as Lummi CDFI. And so if you're familiar with Lummi CDFI, they're now known as Pacific Northwest Tribal Lending. But all of these entities are doing great work in terms of increasing access to capital directly to farmers, ranchers, producers in Indian country. Next slide. So our youth programming, I want to note here, you can apply for our general funding that we just went through, our general category, and apply for a youth project as well. So all entities are eligible. If you're a 501c3, if you are an educational institution, if you are a CDFI, if you are a tribe, you are eligible to apply. The available pool is $1 million. The minimum amount you can apply for is $20,000. The maximum you can apply for is $200,000. Projects can include hands-on food production, support for 4-H, FFA scholarships, youth councils, and other youth and/or education activities. Noting again about the projects, if you were to apply for our general application, you are eligible to apply for the youth programming as well, as long as the applications are not identical. So do not send in the same application twice. They have to be separate projects. Just to flag two more recent grantees that we had funded. Wabanaki out of Bangor, Maine has a really neat youth project that they're focusing on supplying resources really to increase the knowledge of their Wabanaki youth. They're doing seed banking, gardening, and they're providing them with hands-on training in hunting and fishing and ocean farming career fields. We also have Star School out of Flagstaff, Arizona. They serve students pre-K to 8th grade, and they're integrating hands-on ag into their curriculum. It's really neat. We were able to do a site visit with them. They created a livestock club, and they're just providing ag education for their young farmers and ranchers and beginning farmers and ranchers. So those are just two projects I wanted to note for you. Evaluation criteria. So again, you have heard me reference our RFA overview. Our RFA overview will have this information specifically in it. And I believe it's covered starting on page 22, but I really wanted to get in and just share a few specifics on each one of these criteria bullets here. I also want to flag that in the years past, we had innovation and replicability. This year, we're just scoring on innovation. So noting that if you're seeing this and wondering why the innovation piece is different, but we have all of that in our RFA overview. And so I'm going to share a few specifics, if you don't mind. Let me find it here, on kind of what we are looking for when we're saying impact on access to capital and proposed results and outcomes, etc. So for impact on access to capital, as Whitney shared and I've shared, this is really the root of NAAF. So applicants need to identify how and what extent the project focuses on core access to capital issues of Native farmers and ranchers. You should also discuss the impact their project will have on proving access to capital for those Native farmers and ranchers. And as we shared, there is a video located on our website that goes specifically in depth about impact on access to capital. The proposed results and outcomes criteria is scored at a 25% weight. When reviewing applications, we're going to examine the project approach. We're going to look at identified results and outcomes. And we want y'all to really discuss clear statements of what you're anticipating farmers and ranchers will gain from this and understand what the development is going to be geared towards, and the implementation through the farmers, ranchers, producers' participation in this project. How realistic and attainable is this project? Is the estimated number? Is your goal setting? And then also what degree, we're going to look at what degree those anticipated results speak to our NAAF priorities and our NAAF mission. Speaking in this context here for CDFI applicants, we're asking that you really showcase the amount and number of potential loans, regrants, and/or technical assistance that you're going to be providing to those Native farmers and ranchers. Educational organizations or education focus projects discuss the number of students and/or future Native farmers and ranchers that you propose to serve, and the benefits that the students will experience by engaging, in this proposed project. For tribal governments, you can discuss the anticipated impacts on your community and what that will look like. We've shared this before in the past too. Results and outcomes can look different and vary in each community that you come from. So we are understanding that if maybe your project is going to be servicing 5 farmers, ranchers, and producers, but you're nervous that 5 doesn't seem like a big enough number. We understand that 5 farmers, ranchers, producers can have a huge impact on tribal communities, tribal regions, surrounding towns. So be sure to showcase that. Even though you might think, gosh, 5 looks, 5 in comparison to some programs that are reaching 25, 50, 100. Just showcase and explain to us what those resources in this project delivered to these 5 farmers, ranchers, producers, what that can do for your overall region or your overall community. Farmer and rancher demand is at 20%. And specifically thinking about the demand, discuss why this activity or this project even exists. How did this even come about? Did it come from a community event and farmers and ranchers said, we need X, Y, and Z? Share with us the willingness that farmers and ranchers have to participate in these activities, and these proposed indicators that reflect interest in the activities, in the project activities itself. So identification also of the intended audience is required, as well as the location of the intended audience. Specifically speaking to project narratives here, they should discuss how you are going to be recruiting the participants or the audience for this project. For CDFI applicants, we suggest that you discuss the demand for loans among an identified target audience. Educational organizations or ed-focused projects discuss the demand or need for the content that's going to be delivered, and the projected number of anticipated participants. For tribal governments, you can discuss farmer and ranchers who are being affected and served through the funded project. So yeah, a little bit there. Team organizational capacity and collaborators, this is 10%. We're interested in understanding the skills and knowledge and all of the experience of the projected team and the organization that y'all have that is going to effectively deliver on this project. So, and the proposed activity. So we're interested in seeing these specific individuals, identify the relative qualifications and the experience of those primary project personnel. We encourage that. Evaluation is 10%. So if you can share with us how y'all plan to gauge the effectiveness of your project, what's the tracking look like, the success look like, please be sure to spell that out for us so we can get an understanding of how that's going to be determined. And then innovation here, we're evaluating only 10% to which the project's going to employ innovative approach to develop or deliver assistance, tech support, education, and/or advocacy services. And what are the materials or tools that you're utilizing to do that?
Thanks, Chanel. So we do want to note that there's only an option of 12 or 24-month projects. So a few years ago, we decided to eliminate the 18-month projects, and we found that works best for everyone involved. And so next, we'll move on to some important budget notes. So NAAF does allow our grants to fund some indirect funds, but there is a limit of 15%, and there's no exceptions to this limit. And so that limit is calculated by adding up the personnel and direct funds and applying 15% of that. Any intermediary funds applied for will not go into that calculation. And there's more detail on this within the RFA overview. And so, as Chanel mentioned, we do ask that applicants follow the budget guidelines and use our budget templates that are included in the application. And applicants must abide by their request minimums and maximums that are listed in each category. So some critical deadlines to keep in mind. The application will close May 1st, 2026 at 11:59 p.m. Central Time. There is no opportunity to edit or submit an application after this deadline. And the last day to ask staff questions regarding an RFA application is April 23rd at 5 p.m. Central Time. So we use an grant making platform called Foundant to host our application. And you can find that link on our website and also in the RFA overview documents. So if you are a returning applicant, then you can use the existing credentials that you've made before to log on to Foundant. And if you're a new applicant, you can create a new account and follow the provided steps. So once you log on or create your new account, you'll be directed to the applicant dashboard. Here's a preview of what that might look like for you. And you'll see at the top, there's an apply button. And so that's where you'll go to find our application for 2026. And here's what it looks like when you click on that, and then it will bring up the available applications, of which there will only be the 2026 application, and you'll click into it to apply. And this is what it looks like once you get into the body of the application. And from here, you can start filling out your application. We do advise you, the application, we do ask for a lot of detail. So some people like to break the application up into different periods, and so they'll work on it a little bit here and a little bit there. That is perfectly fine to do. Just remember that you're saving your work as you go. So at the very end of the application, there is an option to save your work. Please make sure to do that. And once you've finished filling out the application, please make sure you submit the application, hit that submission button, and that you receive an email confirmation that your application has been submitted.
All right. Thank you so much, Lenora. So that will conclude our 2026 RFA overview webinar. And we're going to turn it over to y'all for any questions and discussion. Dr. Joe Graham will be leading our Q&A this year, and our team will be sure to answer questions as they come in. If for whatever reason your question didn't pop up until later, or you're going through the application and you need assistance or have questions on the proposed application project, you are welcome to email us at grants@Native American Agriculture Fund.org. And our colleague Jess Morago will handle all of those responses, and she will try to get back to you before the close of business on the day that you have sent that email. And we have Loretta manning our phone line in our North Dakota office. So if you prefer speaking with somebody directly, Loretta will be there to answer questions for you.
Okay, hello everybody. Thank you guys for being on here today. So I've seen some comments going back and forth in our group chat. However, if you would like to drop your Q&As in that Q&A function, we can start answering some questions that might deal directly with your project, or just some general questions, or maybe something wasn't clear. This is what that space and time is open for, and we have Dr. Joe Graham here to help answer some of those questions, and I'll be facilitating. So we do have one, but please, as we get going, maybe this will kind of start spurring up some other questions that you might have.
But from Brian, we have, do you have a timeline for announcing award decisions and grant start dates?
Well, we know that the grants are intended to start in the final quarter of the year. So as we work our way through the process, we're trying to get the knowledge out as soon as we can. But sometimes there's little hiccups and stuff. So we don't announce an exact date, but it should be by midsummer, late summer, with the start date um, to begin in towards the end of the year.
Perfect. Yes, I believe November 1 is the rumblings that we have heard for our start date. Okay, so Sandra, she wrote in the group chat, if we do a pass-through grant from our Small Business Development Center, is it specifically for projects related to growing, or can marketing and other activities be eligible?
Other activities can be eligible. We normally take a very broad um, understanding of agriculture. So if you can make the very clear argument that these are agricultural activities, um, and you're very clear in your discussion and argument, we're probably going to go along with that argument. If it's way off track, then nobody's going to go for it. But if to make the leap from production to marketing, that's not a great leap. You can surely make that argument.
Any
Oh, you're muted.
any other questions from any of our participants? We have one from Margaret. For a 24-month proposal, can the first 9 months be used to plan and develop curriculum for education of youth, including college students?
I'm sure that it can, but that has to be built into your plan. Your plan has to describe it that way. Your goals and objectives have to be laid out to where for each of the sections of, each of the quarters, this is what you're going to be doing. And if and you'll have to keep in mind that you have to have time to implement the curriculum that you're developing.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Keep thinking of those questions, y'all. Oh, there we go. Patrick, we would like to establish a community garden that youth would participate in, growing fruits and vegetables. Could we purchase self-contained hydroponic gardens for year-round growing and harvesting?
Short answer, yes. Longer answer, you probably have to have a very clear plan about how you're going to utilize that equipment throughout the course of the year, if that's the kind of equipment that it is. Um, having it designated as just a youth garden to where you have to space out the after schools, the weekends, the youth times, the vacation time or something like that is going to make it difficult, because then you'll have this piece of equipment that's sitting idle for long periods of time. So if you have a plan for year-round equipment that includes youth, that would be something that would be looked at.
Okay. So, Anonymous, does purchasing ingredients from native farmers and ranchers qualify as improving their access to capital, or does NAAF require more direct financial mechanisms, lending, business planning, credit education?
Um, just like everything else, yes and no. Yes, it does contribute to the access to capital for the producers, but your project should be on a line where that's the primary focus is the access to capital. It can't be just a small portion of your project and everything else is going to something else. Oh, and please look at Whitney's note there. And you don't want it benefiting one individual. We talked about, sorry, Whit, we talked about that beforehand, and that's true. Not one individual. It's got to be programmatic to where it's helping, that community's producers, native producers.
And for anyone that's not watching the other chat now, it says Chanel said equipment and supplies are allowable costs just so long as they are tied to your project work in increasing access to capital, ag focused, enhancing agriculture and tribal communities, etc. And then Sandra asked, follow up, can it be used to create a community farmers market to increase access for farmers and to our tribal citizen programs to support food and nutrition programs?
Well, yes, if you're buying from the native producers for this purpose, everything a lot of what you're thinking that's why the period is open for so long, for 2 months, because a lot of what you're thinking, it has to be developed into your plan. If you're buying from local producers, from tribal producers to benefit this other tribal project, that's how you need to call out your plan. If it Because nutrition is part of agriculture, um, production is part of agriculture, purchasing is part of agriculture. So all these parts will be part of your plan. And if your plan is clean, clear, and coherent, then it allows us to understand how you're engaging the ag process.
Nice job, everybody. Okay, from Margaret, for a project with a university extension program partnering with a native-led nonprofit organization, can the university use faculty time, percentage of FTE, as a match in the budget?
Say that again, Sam.
So I think what they're asking for is can, so you know how like universities, when creating positions, like I think this person, Margaret, is wondering if they can use, correct me if I'm wrong, Margaret, but you can use NAAF funding or is a match required? Is that your question?
Match is not required, but that's a little tricky if you're doing because personnel could be a part of your budget. So if personnel is part of your budget, then you got to keep in mind that it's if it was a 24-month grant, which is the maximum, it's going to take a couple of months on front to make sure that all those things get put into place within the university system. And within the university system, it's probably going to even take longer than a couple of months because it's very complex. And then you'll only have that person on for the time of um, the length of the grant. And so it's like trying to get all these systems in places to hire somebody for a year. And that can work in some cases. In some cases, it's a good idea, but in other cases, it's a little bit more tricky. And but you don't need a one-to-one match or anything like that. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, so Margaret, following up there, Joe, Margaret did say yes, 5% of her time would be calculated as a match, but not asking for the NAF funds to pay for the time of the faculty. That is already in position.
Oh, okay. So what I think I'm understanding here is that the faculty member is already on board, and that faculty member is going to contribute some time to the project,
I think so.
and you're going to use some of these personnel funds for the person who's running the project.
Mhm.
That's okay. You can have people on the project that are not paid for by NAF that are just contributing their time at the institution there. that's allowable.
Okay, awesome. I just want to call out this one that Patrick wrote and Chanel had answered in the chat, just for anyone listening. And it's Patrick had said, we have a BIA grant to build an indigenous animal processing and storage facility that will enable tribal members to process, freeze, and store animal meat, fish, and gathered local fruits and vegetables. Can we use this grant to purchase processing/storage equipment? And Chanel said, yes, this falls along the lines of allowable costs. We have had past applications submit similar requests. So just wanted to, that's already been answered, but just wanted to flag that one. And then we have a question from Eliza. She says, I believe you mentioned a probable start date of November 1, but awards announced in midsummer, early fall. Can we start the hiring process as soon as we receive the award letter, or do we need to wait for the start date?
Well, you'll have a grant agreement, and the grant agreement states that there is a allowable the grant is in operation for this certain date. So you can't draw on anything until it's within the working dates of the grant, effective dates of the grant. And both Chanel and Whitney threw in that the agreement has to be signed, and you have to be onboarded before you can start doing those kind of things. I mean, but informally, I guess you can be thinking about them, obviously.
And while we're waiting for maybe some more questions to come through, I'm going to share my screen here just to show you our website. Does that look good, Joe?
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Yes, you're good to go.
Okay, perfect. So this is our 2026 Request for Applications website page. And so everything we covered will be right down here. So we have our introduction, our eligibility, talking about eligible grant recipients, our funding areas, downloads. These are all links to forms. It's really thorough and amazing. Checklist, just to make sure that you're squared up. Webinars, registration links and info, deadline. And we will put our webinars, just as this one's being recorded, they will live here. You can also download the slides to pass around to anybody. We have some video tutorials here. And here are some of our frequently asked questions. So even as we are going over questions in this Q&A period, and we have 2 more webinars after this. So if you're applying and you're getting halfway through and you're like, wait, hang on, I have a question. Of course, you could email us at the contact information that Chanel had passed along. You can also give us a call, but we could address it during the live Q&A portions of those other webinars. But a lot of the questions that I've seen just in our last 2 webinars, a lot of them live here. So if you do need it kind of blankly right in front of your face, quicker than what we can flip back to you, maybe just take a little scroll through some of these questions here. And we have them even divvied up as best we can. So just wanted to call that out. Another thing, and we can get back to some more questions, but our grantee database is awesome. So you can actually click around and see some of the different projects that we have in there. Maybe someone in your area, or if you're thinking of a community garden project and you kind of want to see what other community gardens that have been NAAF funded are doing and what some of their accomplishments or their goals are, you can go ahead and take a look at them on our grantee database site. But just wanted to flag that because I think it's really helpful once you start applying and you're getting into the weeds of some things to take a look at what other people are doing. Not like you have to reinvent the wheel, but also those frequently asked questions. Again, maybe someone has already asked those questions, or maybe they're, moving in their project and they're coming back for a second year of funding and they have more questions. And I definitely recommend checking out these sites off of the RFA page. So we have the RFA webpage, our grantee database, and those frequently asked questions at the bottom of the RFA page.
Sam, I'm going to respond to one more question that came through as it
Okay.
relates to 501c3 entities and 501c5 entities and their eligibility. So I will clarify that our trust agreements at NAAF does explicitly say that we can only fund 501c3 organizations. But technically, if you are applying for 501c3 status, you can use a fiscal sponsor. Um, if you are a 501c5 that is an instrumentality of a tribe, you would be an eligible entity to apply as that instrumentality. We are going to make sure we get you a written response on that as well. But right now, our trust agreement does only say we can fund 501c3 organizations in that designation.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay. We haven't had a question for a while. Anybody have anything on the brain you want to get out there? Or are you guys all watching March Madness?
If you have a question, it pops into your head, you can reach us at grants@nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. There's a deadline 1 week before the close of the open RFA period for questions. So if you have a question, and let me look on my little calendar here to see um, what that date is. Somebody
It's
probably
it's April 23rd
April 23rd. Okay.
by 5
That
by 5 p.m.
okay, by 5 p.m. That's the date. That's the date and time. If you have a question, a written question, that questions after that time won't be answered. Sam, I'm glad you brought up March Madness. It was in my mind to wear my Arizona shirt, Arizona Wildcat shirt. You know, proud alum, proud alum.
Oh, you got a hand clap. Someone else is a
Go
Arizona
tear down
fan.
Wildcats.
Okay. So we're just gonna hang out for a couple more minutes here, just in case you have a last minute thought that you want to put out there. But other than that, thank y'all so much for attending today's webinar. Like we said, it's going to be sent out and it's also going to be posted. Please follow us on social media for any updates. We're on all the socials, LinkedIn, X, Facebook, Instagram. We have a YouTube channel you can check out and make sure that you get really familiar with our website, nativeamericanagriculturefund.org. Other than that, we have another webinar scheduled here in the next coming weeks, and you can get your questions answered there. Have a good day, everybody. Awesome. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you all.
Oh, we got a question. Ready, Joe?
Yes.
Okay. From Amy, we don't run a formal business development program for producers, but we do create consistent demand and income for native farmers and gatherers through ingredient purchasing. Is that a strong enough case to be competitive, or whether we need to add program components to strengthen an application?
The key word in that question is ingredients. Like, what is it that is being purchased for your project? It, if it was something like really, really substantive, then it could be something that might draw some attention to the application. If it's something minor, then definitely other components of the process will have to be included, will have to be involved. So that's 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 what I would say about that.
Awesome. Okay. It looks like people are logging off, so I guess we can too. Thank y'all, and we will see you next time. Have a good one. Bye.
Bye bye.